Hello and welcome to this Mad Sense video in which I want to talk about how voices are able to create an escalation in the experience that clearly demonstrates that they have intent. I decided to do this morning because I've been attending a conference at Durham University called Personification Across Disciplines, and we've been talking about personification and of course how that translates to intent. So clearly, of course, when you start to hear voices, and of course you've never heard of the concept of hearing voices, all you're hearing is two people talking about what you're doing or whatever it is they're talking about. Because, of course, you associate voices with people, so of course we obviously personify voices immediately. It's just, it's automatic. We're just completing a pattern. Voices come from people, period. So you don't even say I'm hearing voices, you say people are talking about me. So the personification happens immediately. A piece that that actually appears through all my other videos, but I'm just wanted to do a couple of simple slides today, just to show how easily non-verbal tactics, if you like, of voices escalate the experience. And this is to clearly demonstrate that voices arrive with intent to deceive and to manipulate and to anticipate what it is that you're doing. So I have only 3 slides in this particular video. The first is just to remind you that actually, because the stimuli that we get from voices or from this phenomenon are unusual, they provoke questions which lead us to form a belief. In fact, a little belief system around logical answers to the very basic questions. So, as I've said before, I mean, I was living in this apartment in New York, this one down the bottom here. I heard these 2 voices, a female voice saying he seems to be okay, a male voice in the background just grunting, seemingly disinterested, another couple of comments, and then the female voice saying he eats better than we do, because I was busy making something to eat, and the male voice again grunting in the background, and I was in the kitchen making something to eat. So of course my first reaction was, I'm home alone, so what the fuck is going on? Who could this be? I figured out who on the basis of answering actually a how question. I said that the only way somebody could comment on the fact that I was eating, was if they could see what I was actually doing. The only place from which to see what I was doing, it was from this external fire escape. The only people with access to the fire escape was the neighbors upstairs. Therefore, who had to be answered, the only logical answer, the only plausible answer was the upstairs neighbors. Now, of course, that's particularly unusual behavior for the neighbors. So, of course, I asked the question, why? Why would they be doing this? And, of course, this happened on a day that I had hurt myself that afternoon and made a lot of noise, which was very unusual for me. So I inferred from that, I rationalized that the reason the neighbors were peeking in from the fire escape as opposed to coming and knocking on my door was because we didn't actually know each other. We had just bumped into each other on the internal staircase and said hello. So, of course, they weren't sure what was going on, so they simply decided they could actually just come and peek in the window. I mean, it wasn't unusual for people to stand outside on the fire escape in the summer and just enjoy the outdoors for a little. So peeking in from the fire escape wouldn't have been that unusual, I guess, if they were out there already. And of course, the other things that are are, I think, deliberate here are, of course, that the voices were mimicking voices at a distance, so they sounded just a little far away. And of course, there were 2 voices, a male voice and a female voice. And of course, it was a male-female couple that lived upstairs. So I had this corroborating evidence. They were obviously people because they ate. And of course, it was a male and a female. So there were all this corroborating stuff that pointed me very specifically towards the only logical conclusion that this was my upstairs neighbors. So this is why this then becomes the fixed belief, that sort of focuses your action. So when I say focuses your action, on day 1, I was still, I was concerned actually that the upstairs neighbors were unreasonably concerned. So after I'd finished eating, ran upstairs and knocked on their door to let them know that I was okay. There was no reply, and I left it at that. But the point I'm making is that the answer to the series of questions, which came from these two comments, this one, the two people, and this, he seems to be okay, was my rationalization for why, is what focused my action. As I say, I could either have gone upstairs or not gone upstairs. I mean, those were the two basic options I had. I chose to do it, but as I say, there was no reply. But I left it at that, because that was the end of it. So the end of it until the voices continued the next day. And what that did was it's destabilized these answers to these questions, because the why answer now no longer made sense, because it made no sense that I would still be hearing my neighbors talking about what I was doing the next day. And of course, that destabilization of the answers to these questions. So it's just creating an imbalance in the chain of logic when I say destabilizing. So as I say, all that happened was this very quick, I could hear the voices, that's what they said, plus this context equals it's the neighbors. The next day I'm hearing them, so of course now I'm actually asking different questions. And what I want to do on this slide is show you how voices just used tactics to escalate the distress. And these tactics are not directly verbal, they're either behavior or location. And I say it's kind of the body language that goes with what voices are actually saying. So this is the layout of the apartment, this is the fire escape, this is the kitchen, so this is just sort of looking at the floor from the ceiling, if you like. So I had been here making something to eat when I heard the voices, so I inferred that the neighbors were of course over here. And the next day, I could still hear them while I was in this kind of living area. And I thought it was a little unusual, certainly for the neighbors. But it didn't take long before actually there was a third voice, and I had these two female voices talking about what I was doing in a very gossipy kind of tone in the bedroom, and then later on in the bathroom. And of course, these are private spaces that could no longer be seen from the fire escape. So two things happened. One is my neighbors were now behaving badly because they were talking about what I was doing, as I say, in private spaces. And of course, they could not be seen from the fire escape. So I had to find another answer to the question, how? So, of course, the only thing I could think of was potentially cameras, either having been put in my apartment, because of course people could have got into the apartment and got to my PC, which was usually on the desk here, and they could certainly have come in and put cameras on. The windows weren't ever locked, so literally if I was out, all somebody had to do was climb down the fire escape and climb in. It's not as if anybody worried about security or anything from that point of view. But of course, this is now unreasonable behavior. So now, of course, the idea of approaching the neighbors doesn't really make sense, because if this is them and they're doing this with cameras and they're coming to the apartment to put them in, of course, they're just going to deny it. So, of course, I need evidence, and that's how my actions are actually focused. I now start to look for evidence that my neighbors are somehow spying on me, because I still can't find an alternative to the idea that it's the neighbors, so it must be the neighbors. But the only thing I can do about it is look for evidence of how, as opposed to evidence that it is them. Okay, so I'm looking for the how first. So that's pretty straightforward. My answers are again focusing my actions in a very logical way, even those actions seem unreasonable, of course, to others. Of course, the next thing that happened was that voices started talking about things prior to the day I first heard them. So then this idea of observing became knowing. So they knew stuff about me that they shouldn't have known, which meant that they had been peeking in on me or spying on me before I could hear them. So this observing what I was doing had now become spying on me, simply by changing the location and changing the time frame of their comments. So they simply moved backwards in time, spoke about things that had happened before that they shouldn't have seen, and that then creates this experience of being spied on. These little shifts, it doesn't seem obvious to others, I hope, of course, it gets pointed out in this way. And of course, the next big shift that I kind of remember was the sort of comment by one of these two gossipy voices now that is on his banking website. And of course, that's something you don't want people commenting on because it probably means they're connected to your PC somehow. And of course, that was the thing that I realized if they could see my PC screen, I could actually write them a note. And if so I did. I wrote them a note. I opened Word, wrote them a note. This was kind of in the evening, simply to say, look, this is not cool. Go away. It's it's a problem in sort of firm language, shall we say? And of course, the voices got quiet that evening. But the next morning, I suddenly had a whole gang of voices. I suddenly had 6 or 7 voices, bombarding me and telling me what to do and what not to do. So the body language, if you like, of that, the intent of that, was that voices, that these people that were doing this to me, I still hadn't heard of the concept of hearing voices, so it was still just obviously people, were imposing consequences for my pushing back on them. So this is obviously very unreasonable behavior. In fact, it's completely disrespectful. It's rude. It's bullying. It's abusive. So the intent is absolutely clear. Voices set out to deceive me that they were the neighbors. Okay? Once that belief was actually fixed, they then set out to show me that they were completely unreasonable, and not just unreasonable, they were downright rude and malign. So approaching them was not a reasonable thing to do without evidence. Okay, so in my case, I got a friend over, and of course, my landlady over, and of course, I'm talking about this, but all that did was get my friend and landlady thinking about what's going on with Greg. Meantime, the evidence that I have is that my neighbors are spying on me, even though my friend and landlord can't hear them. That's just more evidence of their bad and manipulative behavior. So, of course, I say approaching the neighbors is just not something you're going to do. And then the next thing was this continuation of the kind of shift of where I could hear voices. And I began to hear them just at the door kind of thing as I was sort of starting to leave the apartment. And then, the next day kind of thing just outside the door, sort of the next day on the staircase, the day after that on the door to the street, and the day after that on the street, just outside the door, and the day after that along the street. And then, of course, I went into, at some point, I had started working outside the apartment. And, of course, I went along to an internet cafe to log into the internet email or something because I wasn't trusting my computer anymore. And, of course, by this stage, voices were talking to me and not just about me. And they actually said, what do you think you're doing? You're logging in at an internet cafe. We can see what you're doing. We know your username, your email address, your password. You must be crazy. Of course, we can track you. So, and that's just the content that goes along with the idea that this spying had now become following. But the experience of being followed was introduced gradually by this kind of shift in location at the door, just outside the door, down the staircase, just this side of the door, that side of the door, along the street. I mean, this obvious progression of location that creates the impression of being followed. And of course, that sense of being followed then became a sense of being anticipated. And then eventually, I say, when I could hear them out there, I went to the internet cafe, and I say, the last weekend I had this apartment because I'd given notice on it. And I just had my PC fixed. I didn't want to take my PC back to the apartment. I checked into a hotel. And of course, when I walked into the hotel, into the bedroom, I could hear voices again. And of course, that was then just them demonstrating the fact, of course, that they could anticipate what I was doing. And of course, that they had now arrived in the room next door or something. This was kind of, the craziest ideas you come up with, just rationalizing how is this happening or trying to find answers for how. They knew what I was doing because, of course, I'd already booked the hotel. So they must have somehow managed to get the room next door, is what you kind of, the conclusion you jump to at that stage, because you're now convinced, of course, they're behaving very, 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 very badly. But of course, the key point is, that's what people are seeing in me, is they're seeing me jumping to this conclusion that, my neighbors are now messing with me at the hotel, which seems completely unreasonable. And I agree with that. It is completely unreasonable. That's the point. That's what's causing the distress. But of course, what you're not seeing is this kind of evidence, that I say went from this kind of observing to knowing, to spying on, to following, to anticipating, which then gives you this kind of experience of that this thing is inescapable And of course, that in my case is what caused my first panic attack. And I ripped cards out of my PC and went off to get help from a friend, and blah. You've seen this in other videos. So this kind of idea of voices anticipating what you're doing and of having a strategy to lead me specifically to believe that it was the neighbors, and then that the neighbors were behaving badly, which put me in a position in which I was powerless to act against the neighbors, and then did other things to avoid this experience, that of course others see as unreasonable and Greg behaving irrationally. Whereas in fact, I'm behaving very rationally. It's the situation I've been put in that's irrational, because that kind of behavior from neighbors would be completely irrational. And of course, I have no alternative explanation for it, because I've never heard of the concept of hearing voices. I'm just thinking this is my neighbors behaving badly, very badly. And of course, the other thing was this kind of following piece in particular made me again start challenging the who, because it would be very unusual for the neighbors to be able to follow me on the street. In the bedroom and bathroom, at home, as I say, they could just have got in the window and put in cameras. That's plausible. But following me on the street was kind of unusual. So, of course, I now start to ask questions about who this is. And, of course, the answers I'm coming up with have to be answers that demonstrate, of people or organizations that have the capability to follow me somehow with technology, and know when I'm logging in somewhere else, and actually know that I'm planning to do it. So there's some connection somehow to your thinking at this stage. And of course, by this stage, as I said, my voices were talking directly to me. So I just didn't have any clue, of course, what that meant. But of course, that was just that uncertainty, that doubt, was fueling weird answers to the how and who questions, because I just didn't have any kind of sensible answers. And of course, voices then just proceeded to maintain this doubt for the next couple of years, particularly by making claims about what they are. So this is just me minding my business, as I say, wondering about my neighbors at first. And of course, once they started to follow me, I had this kind of idea, well, this can't be the neighbors. I had this sort of unknown entity that was doing this. And of course, I was plugging in different answers at different times. And of course, it's also that because they're now following me around, they've created this impression of acting from an all-seeing vantage point. And of course, they then just try to escalate that all-seeing vantage point to being a position of being all-knowing and omnipotent. And of course, that would just simply happen by introducing the ideas of what they might be, by suggestion and by assertion. So they started to, when I was saying to them, well, who are you? Because it was this conflict that they were just kind of introducing all the time. Of course, the conflict is just making you ask all these questions. So of course, because I'm now talking to them, I've realized by this stage, of course, that my thoughts are expressed as half of the conversation, and that we're actually interacting, which initially was empowering because I can fight back. And of course, as in that fighting back, I'm saying, well, who the hell are you? And of course, they then started to just introduce the idea of ancestors in general, and kind of trying to tie into our sort of fairly generic belief in some kind of hereafter, or wishful thinking about some kind of hereafter, as I didn't necessarily believe in it. But of course, the first answers were Stephen and Maureen, which were names of people that I knew who had passed on. But of course, the characters of these voices were absolutely nothing like either Stephen or Maureen. Neither Stephen nor Maureen were capable of behaving this badly. So I dismissed that and said, you're neither Stephen nor Maureen. And they kind of said, okay, well, we're just people who had died. And then, of course, much later on, actually introduced ideas of being my grandmother. And of course, not long after I heard voices, one of my nieces was killed. So of course, then she was introduced into this kind of mix. But of course, what's happening here with the grandmother and niece, this is now direct family. Of course, this is making it much, much more personal. These are people that love you. And these are people, this entity is behaving badly. And now what they've done is they've introduced good guys and bad guys in this other world. And of course, all that just gives them more tactics with which to create conflict by playing off the good guys and the bad guys. And of course, the bad guys just got worse and worse and worse, pretending to be good as God. In fact, not just pretending to be, claiming to be God. And of course, asking me to rewrite the Bible. Later on saying you're the perfect man for the job. Initially undefined, but then becoming the second coming. So they're creating a very specific relationship between God and then me as the second coming. So they're trying to change who they are and trying to change my impression of who I am. Because actually, just by mocking me as an individual didn't work. I had a pretty strong sense of self. I was confident in who I am, so that stuff didn't work. So instead, they went the other way around and kind of tried to boost me. But of course, making me the second coming just placed all sorts of additional responsibilities on me and gave them a completely different set of standards by which to judge me and mock me and mess with me, basically. So all they're doing is they're creating two different endpoints in this relationship. And of course, what they're trying to do is make the distance between those. If distance is a measure of power, they're trying to maximize the distance between those two endpoints of our relationship. So, of course, God morphed into being just the devil. When I say just the devil, that was actually the best fit in terms of the behavior of these voices. I say by this stage, there were kind of three that were constantly sort of badgering me, a couple of minions, and God, who became the devil. And of course, in time, as I pushed back on each of these, saying, you're not God, where's the love, where's the respect in particular? They don't have to love me, but they certainly, it's not unreasonable for me to demand respect. And of course, this is how I pushed back. And of course, when you ask voices that question, it's a great way to push back on voices, by the way, is when you ask them that question, they have no reasonable answers. And of course, other than to say, well, I'm the devil and I don't give a damn. So of course, by behaving badly, of course, you're more likely to accept or fix a belief that this is in fact the devil or a demon or somebody who's abused you in the past or whatever. And this is why I use the mask, is it could be anything that's interacting from this other sort of space that can actually see and interfere and claim to intervene. And of course, so I pushed back on all of these. And of course, after the devil, of course, God just morphed these two characters together and became God the devil, as an evil God. So simply saying that actually God was evil, kind of all along. And I simply say that, of course, for God to claim to have created the kind of universe, of course, he had to claim responsibility for evil. Meantime, he was actually just claiming to be a god, and of course, at the time, people believed in gods in the same way that we believe, or a lot of us believe, in a life hereafter. Of course, at the time that God claimed to be God, the one God. People believed in gods anyway, and of course, they just accepted the idea that there is just this kind of one God. Anyway, so God was just God. So voices were just escalating this the other end of what's at this kind of relationship. So from some sort of unknown, where I was trying to fill in the blanks by myself, and of course over here they then started, because they didn't like the way I was filling this in, they decided to fill it in for me. And claimed to be God and the devil, and then an evil God. And of course, as I pushed back on this, they eventually claimed to be aliens. And of course, there were good aliens and bad aliens. So I have, all this crap going on with these voices that are right up close and personal. But in the background, I also have voices kind of saying, I love you. And of course, that was initially supposed to be these guys, so I called them the I love yous. And of course, I called these guys the Italians. And of course, these guys were acting as a team. And of course, this is discouraging me. This is encouraging me. And of course, this is just inserting conflict, one problem after another. So just as you've seen on the page beforehand, the problem was my neighbors talking about what I was doing in the living room, then a bigger problem in the bedroom and bathroom, and then somehow following me outside, and then in an internet cafe, and then in a hotel. Because all they're doing is escalating the size of the problem to make it something that's inactionable, so that actually it's inescapable and inactionable, and therefore you have to sit and take it, and you have no choice but to take it, is the kind of what happens with this. And this is the intent of voices, to create a scenario in which you sit there and feel that you're either afraid to go after them, and of course your actions are actually limited. Well, actually the answer is just to tell them to get the fuck out of your life, okay? It's as simple as that. And say that this is my life, I will define the rules of this kind of relationship. You're unwelcome, unwanted. And if you're going to hang around and be that pathetic and hover in my life for 10 years, which I've had with this now, you can tell I'm irritated by today. This is just because we are of one of the topics in yesterday's conference. Your approach really, your only available approach is to be firm with voices and say to them, really, I'm not going to tolerate this nonsense. I don't believe any of your threats. The worst you can do is actually throw weird phenomenology at me. And when you do that, I'm just going to go and lie on the bed and say to you, okay, get on with it. Tell me when you're finished, okay? You have to face them. And the best way to do it is with aggression. So rather than timidly just kind of saying to them, I'm not going to be bothered by you, or go away, swear at them, tell them to get freaking lost, get out of your life. You need to match that emotion that they're kind of throwing at you with something more powerful. And the best thing you can do is actually get angry and just tell them to piss off out of your life, okay? And I say there's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. The worst they can impose on you is some dramatic kind of phenomenology. And of course, what you do with that is you just make a little safe space on the couch or on the bed, and you lie there and say, okay, when you're done, I'll get on with my life. It's pretty much what it's about. But to say the key point here is the personification, of the voices that we're hearing happens very quickly. Because voices are people, and of course, in my case, voices claim to be all sorts of kind of spirit entities. These are just variations on personification, sort of unknown. You're liable to fill in something here: the CIA, the Russian army, Mossad, whatever organization has the capability to follow you with some kind of technology, in whatever region you happen to live in. And of course, these then were assertions by voices themselves. And of course, there were many others. And of course, voices can't be all those things. Although, of course, they would like to claim to be able to be that, of course, and this. And in fact, of course, and this. I mean, they did try and make the claim that there are, at some point, all of these things. And of course, I just completely disagree with that. And of course, just tell them to sort of get lost. So, of course, the thing with this happened over a period of years. So in the apartment, the slide beforehand, they kind of shift from one location to another. It was over a period of weeks. This was over, but of course I was unable to anticipate it because I had no idea what was coming. So equally with this, I had no idea what was coming. But of course, this happened over a couple of years. And of course, each of these created a whole new set of scenarios in which I'm actually asking, all these kinds of questions. Well, what if it is this? What if it is the CIA? What if it is Mossad? What if it is China? What if it is, and of course, a lot of those ideas were just suggestions from voices as well. But of course, all they're doing is, the reason voices don't tell you what they are is they want you to come up with a belief that aligns to the scariness of their behavior, because that's what gives them power. And they need to do that because they have no actual power. The only power they have is in your beliefs about them and about what they are and about what they can do. And they can't do a thing, as I say, other than pester you. Okay, so when you push back on them, they have no choice in the end but to fall back. And actually, the worst they can impose on you is crappy phenomenology. And of course, it's a pain in the neck to sit on the couch for 2 hours, or 4 hours, or my worst was 5 days of voices keeping me awake. It's a real pain in the neck to go through that. But until you do that, until you actually say to voices, do your worst and do it now, you don't actually break the hold over you. So to break that hold with the power that they're exerting, that's what you've got to do. And you can do it in a way that you can create the conditions for success by coaching the people around you, making a safe space, and you might not even get it right the first time. I mean, you might kind of lie on the couch for 15 minutes and say, no, this is too much, and go and do something, go and do something else, or go and sit and talk to someone or whatever. But actually, fundamentally, it's the best way to do it is to face up to it, face the fear, and recognize actually that it's all threats with no real power behind them. And the perceived power comes from this sort of kind of escalation in belief about what they are, which comes from voices behaving aggressively. So when they're behaving aggressively, you're going to form a belief about their power. And of course, this kind of observing, becoming, spying on, following, knowing, anticipating, what have you, is the thing which we are projecting, and we're kind of thinking that gives them power in the world. So, of course, all of these things were, we have ideas of what these characters are capable of in the world. So, of course, that's just how they're kind of getting us to worry about the implications. And actually, the implications are zero. What you've got to worry about is literally the beliefs and phenomenology that voices are imposing on you. The beliefs are just that. They're beliefs. They're not truths. You can just change them. You could say, I've just made caricatures of my voices and given them silly names. Phenomenology is something you can sit out. So that's it. That was just to give you an idea of personification and intent. So the personification happens immediately. If this is a clear demonstration of how voices demonstrate intent. The things that they did, were not things that I could actually predict. They're not things that I thought about. They're not things that I was even capable to me of thinking about. It was scenarios that voices created by making changes, in what they were doing, literally how they were behaving, that I would call kind of non-verbal language, if you like, cues. They created new scenarios that very clearly demonstrate intent. So thanks for listening. As before, I'd like to keep some of this free if I can for people who hear voices. I have this fundraiser on CrowdRise called Someone You Know Hears Voices. It's great if you are able to contribute. If you would like to chat on social media about this, please use the hashtag Made Sense. And of course, there are other organizations working in this kind of space. And this is actually where I am today in Durham in the UK at a conference at Durham University organized by Hearing the Voice. So thank you for listening.